Good evening and welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm your host, Joshua Solomon, and my co-host, the Honorable J.P. Marzullo, is out on assignment. He's out beating up commies. He's going to come back bruised, but rest assured, you won't have to beat up any New Hampshire commies. He's getting rid of them. He's dumping them off in Massachusetts. As always, Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades is sponsored by the Wilson Hill Pistol Club at 1732 Lakeshore Road, right here in Manchester, New Hampshire. WilsonHillPistol.org. You can go there. You can get information about the meetings. The meetings are the first Wednesday of every month from 6 to 7. Open membership. Oldest sports shooting club in the state. We'd love to have you. And tonight, we have Therese Bastarash.
You almost had it. Yeah. Bastarash.
Yeah.
It takes a few times for everybody. Hey, guys.
So, Therese, you're running for Executive Council,
Yep.
District 4, and it's a crowded race. Tell us about yourself.
It's a very crowded race. There's 6 of us that are actually running. I am the only female that's running, so I'm up against 5 males. Not that that matters, but we have John Stephen, John Reagan, Ross Terrio, Ryan Terrell, Bob Burns, and myself that are running for the same seat.
Right. Yeah, that's a crowded race for a single district.
It is very crowded.
Now, the Executive Council, all 5 seats run every 2 years, right?
Yes, it's a 2-year term. There's 5 different individuals that make up our Executive Council here in New Hampshire. Each one represents 20% of the state.
Okay. Therese, you live in Loudon?
Correct.
Tell us about yourself. Tell us your background.
Sure.
Tell us what brought you here.
Absolutely. It's been quite the journey. I tell everyone my dad raised me up on Rush Limbaugh and talk radio, and so to be here listening and talking with you is, I know my dad would be looking down from heaven saying, "Go get him, girl." My mom was the humanitarian. She was a hospice nurse, and growing up, my parents actually adopted 4 children and had guardianship over 5 others. I remember looking at my mom and saying, "I want to be Bonnie," who was my brother's caseworker. And my mom said, "Oh, no, you don't. Don't go do that. Go be a nurse or do something other than that." And I ended up spending a lot of time, and my dad was a very successful businessman. He was a workaholic and blessed us with just a great amount of sense of, as long as you can be better than average and push yourself a little bit harder, you're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And just always was pushing us to do a little bit more than we thought we could. And his work ethic and his blood runs through my veins. He was very stubborn and also very, he just lived for what was just and what was right. When he saw something that didn't look right, he couldn't sit silent about it. So that definitely, that apple didn't fall far from the tree. So I call myself a fiscal conservative humanitarian. I am definitely a mix of both my father and my mom. I am a registered nurse currently working 2 16-hour shifts a week, overnight shifts. And I also adopted my 2 younger children, Max and Brett, out of DCYF care. And I was running a ministry for kids that were in state custody. But before that, before 9/11, actually, I was in finance. I went right from high school into being a bank teller and worked my way right through corporate America. I ended up being the youngest director for Washington Mutual, and I was overseeing a $6 billion portfolio, retail deposit portfolio out of Concord.
All right, so wait a minute.
Sure.
You're working for Washington Mutual,
yes.
Right? One of the huge national, yes. Okay. And you're overseeing a $6 billion portfolio.
Correct.
And something in your brain said, "I want to be a nurse instead"?
Yes.
Tell me how that worked.
How that happened. So it was Providian Financial, who is mostly a credit card company. We were managing out of Concord the deposit portfolio that backed the debt that we were loaning out to people. And my work ethic got me to a point where I was overseeing the call center, and then the project team, and then marketing, and then the policies and procedures, and just on and on it went. And then Providian ended up being bought out by Washington Mutual. Continued to work through that. My boss is Eric O'Brien, who lives in in Bedford, and Diane Peterson, who are still out there today, cheering me on. But when 9/11 happened, shortly after that, there was a big shakeup in the financial markets, and
we had ourselves a little bit of a crash there.
Yeah, we did.
Even I was laid off in that period.
Right.
So
we got word that they were going to shut down the site and move it to Arlington, Texas. And I had the choice: do I want to move to Arlington, Texas, or do I want to stay in New Hampshire? And it was at that point that I said, I kind of defaulted into this corporate America project management role. I was honestly a little burnt out. And I said, what do I really want to do with my life? I was about 31, 32 at the time. And I just decided I didn't want to commute to Boston to make the money that I was making. I didn't want to go to Fidelity down to Merrimack from Loudoun. I loved where I live. I'm an equestrian. I have horses. I love to get out in the woods. I loved, the idea of raising my daughter here in New Hampshire, and I really didn't want to leave New Hampshire. So I looked at my options. I knew I had a year before we were lights off at Washington Mutual, and the college that I already had, I looked and I could get my return on investment to go back to school to become an RN just really made sense to me. My brother was a paramedic, my mom was a nurse, my best friend was a nurse. I love people, I love science, and I thought, well, they can't outsource this to India. But I did. I went into Eric, my boss at the time, and said, hey, Eric, I'm going to go back to school while we wait to wind things down here to become an RN. And I remember he looked at me and said, but you've got such a successful career in finance. Why would you do that? You realize you could kill somebody if you become a nurse, right? And I was like, well, I hadn't really thought of it that way. But
no, you got to turn that around and say, well, that's the power that I really want.
I was just thinking, it was
just kidding.
No, that it was job security, and I thought that it would feel more purposeful. I thought it was a noble profession. Just kind of always respected my mom and those that I knew that were nurses, and I knew healthcare was really broken too. So it kind of was like, well, maybe I can use my business background to somehow go into administration and help fix healthcare. You know what I mean? I thought it would recycle and that we'd be able to use it in that capacity. And so I did. We wound down, and then Diane Peterson, who was my boss, one of my bosses, she went to work for Granite State Management and Resources, which is a student loan company out of Concord. And she was there, and she recruited me over there while I finished my second year of nursing school to be the client relationship manager. And I ended up doing RFPs and bids and ended up winning the contract for both Rhode Island and Connecticut for us to service their loan portfolios out of Concord. So that was another big piece of my background and my history. When I was at Washington Mutual, this shows how old I am, I'm 51, we had launched the first website for Providian. I remember the Providian.com, everything was becoming .coms, and Y2K and all of that was kind of during that genre, but we were moving everything onto basically a web-based platform, and allowing customers to change their address and have it done online and have it kind of hit our system and not have a lot of steps in between of redundancy. And I ended up on that project with Accenture and working with people in India. We ended up with the Alexander Hamilton Best in Technology in Finance Award in New York City. So that was kind of the highlight of that part of my career. So it was a big shift for me to go from that. And now as a nurse, 10, 15 years later now, I often wonder, should I have stayed in finance? Because healthcare is very, very broken, but I do love being a nurse.
So that gives you some free time too. I mean, you obviously, I'm sure you had to pay your dues as a nurse, but
right.
If you're doing 2 16-hour shifts a week, that's 32 hours a week. So I mean, you're almost full time, right? Or I guess that's technically part-time. Like you have to cross that 32. But in any case, that's 2 shifts a week that can be dealt with, and then so you're making your money, and then you've got some free time.
Yes.
And you told me before the show that you've been spending your free time doing something.
Yes. So yes, we actually, my husband and I, we also own a business. We have a 4-bay garage in Boscawen called Buster's. So my dad, had businesses. So my husband's very supportive of what I'm doing. But yeah, I can't beat my schedule. I go in Thursday at 3 p.m. I get off Friday morning at 7 a.m. And then I do that again on Sunday, 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. So I'm there with the kids and my husband, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday until 3. And they all know that I need a nap for a few hours, Friday morning and Monday morning. But then the rest of the week, I have time on my hands. And when COVID hit, that's really where my political journey began. I was always a down ballot Republican. And it wasn't that I didn't care about my country, I didn't care about politics. I was very aware of it. I did macro and microeconomics in college. I was looking at political science when I first graduated high school. And so it was always kind of there in the background for me and very deeply rooted in my political kind of leaning, I guess you would say. But I had more of a passion for the kids that were in state custody and becoming a licensed foster mom and bringing awareness to that there's these children that need us as a community to step up. So, when I hear people say, the country's in a hot mess because people aren't involved enough, we have to understand that some people just aren't going to eat, sleep, and talk about politics in, August. The average person, my husband, who's a mechanic who works 60 hours a week, isn't going to know all the ins and outs of what's going on, right? Or the mom who's a single mom working 3 jobs. But it doesn't mean that they don't care about our country. So what happened with me is the pandemic happened, the schools shut down. I had to go remote with my 2 little boys. They both have trauma and delays. And so I switched to doing on-call overnight hospice nurse at that time. And I remember, the masking of the children, the shutdown, but what really got me was when I couldn't take my boys to the ocean. And
that was just nuts.
Yeah.
People getting arrested for sitting in the sand.
Yes. I had to sneak my boys to the beach.
We've beat that subject to death on this show.
And then
it's crazy. There's I don't understand why the majority of Americans didn't stop and think about this.
Right.
Why did everybody just go along with it? Right. At no point did I submit to it. I mean, I had to go places where it was mandatory, right? I couldn't get on an airplane without it, so I had to deal with that. But in my everyday life here in New Hampshire, even if a business mandated it, okay, fine, I'm not going, right?
Yep.
And this idea that you can't spend time outside without a mask on.
Right. I think the first thing was
And so we had doctors and nurses and seriously, tell us what the science is behind these masks that don't actually do anything.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was very real. Don't get me wrong. I was actually for the first
I'm not debating whether or not it was real. I'm debating whether or not the lockdowns and the masks were necessary.
Right. So yeah, I was actually
we've
working.
Had flu outbreaks in the past,
right?
And it's something I've had to explain to people. COVID is a short for coronavirus.
Right.
Every flu, every common cold, they are all coronaviruses.
Correct.
It's just a new mutation of the same flu that we've had, and we've all had 100 times since the day we were born.
Right.
But we've taken to calling it something new, and so somebody, I have COVID. You have a cold, just like, that's what we called it in 2017. We called it a cold.
Right. I mean, it really hit the fragile, but what I was seeing, I was actually working for, as an admission liaison for a rehabilitation center for when it first broke. And then I transitioned to overnight so I could be home with my boys when everything went remote and everything shut down. And I was having to review the stories out of the ICU. Mm-hmm. But as a seasoned nurse, the thing that struck me the most was that we weren't doing daily labs on patients that were in the ICU. That was unheard of in my career. And yes, it was viral, but laying flat, warm, sugary, moist, dark, you go bacterial very quickly with pneumonia.
There were a lot of things about what was going on in the emergency rooms and in the hospitals that was scary to me. I actually I actually told my wife, don't let me go to the hospital, right? If this happens, because I was watching this play out, and it was almost a death sentence. Anyone who actually went on a respirator, remember that business? We were desperate to find respirators because we were running out across the country. But everyone who went on it died.
Yeah. There's just, I mean, there was nurse practitioners.
They pulled everybody out of the hospital except for essentials.
Right.
And then they weren't. Now I'm hearing from you that once they did that, they weren't doing the normal daily things that they would normally be doing.
No, and I can talk bravely about it now. I was pretty brave at the time, but Holly Buckley was a nurse practitioner at Dartmouth. McCall Abbott, she was a nurse practitioner for Concord Hospital. All of us were like, why can't we try ivermectin? Why can't we do these other things? What is wrong that we wouldn't do? There were so many red flags that something really weird was happening. And fortunately, when I went through nursing school, I actually had watched a documentary, Nurses of the Third Reich, and it talked about how the nurses were the ones who were basically led down a path to believe they needed to clear the beds for the soldiers, and they would put the babies out on the porches to freeze, and the disabled, and that's how really the Holocaust happened. And I remember my nursing instructor saying, you're going to have the baby boomers hit the healthcare system, and there's going to be this huge hit to the healthcare system, and there's not going to be the staffing to support it. Be on the lookout for something like this. She actually said that. I went back to find her to say thank you, because that was always in the back of my head. And had that instructor not said that, I don't know that I would have picked up on it as quickly as I did, because I watched a lot of my peers just not really even have the critical thinking skills to question.
No, I'm the first to admit that when it started, when it started to break out and we started to hear the news I wasn't fully aware of what was going on. I mean, it took a couple of weeks before I said, "Wait a minute, we're really going a little bit overboard here."
We all thought we were going to die that first 30 days.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
But then it was like, okay, when is this going to end? And it doesn't end for a year and a half.
The shutdowns and the business closures.
And then that whole business with the ivermectin and what's the other one? The shot. Chloroquine? Well, there's a hydrochloroquine, but there was another thing. But in any case, we were told we can't do any of those things. But we know, not just anecdotally, but we know from science that these are things that do work, right? And when we see it happening in other countries, right? We see countries in South America and countries in Africa who are taking ivermectin all the time for other viral and parasitic diseases.
River blindness and
exactly. These are all parasitic and viral diseases that ivermectin has been proven to be effective against, and yet we were told we can't even try it against this new virus.
Right.
But every one of us who did try it, because very early on, I'm going to say it out loud. I found some ivermectin and I shipped it in, and I got it before the FDA shut it down.
Yeah.
Because it's not a controlled substance, right? It may be a prescribed substance, but it's not a controlled substance, so it's not illegal to possess it.
Yeah.
And then once I got that, I never had a problem.
Yeah, one of my girlfriends is a nurse practitioner, and she actually had an email from Concord Hospital that said, if you prescribe this, your license will be revoked, and you'll be removed. And she decided at that point to give her notice and go into private practice. That's how firm she felt. And Holly Buckley, the same thing, who's no longer here with us, unfortunately. But Warp Speed passed.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
I've derailed us enough.
We've all talked about it so much, over the years. But yeah, there basically came down to, I had a girlfriend who was 28 years at Concord Hospital. Her husband's a logger. He was going through oncology treatment, and she was having to pay $1,200 a month for childcare because the schools had shut down. So you're just shifting the kids to another. But she fell apart in my arms. She was like, Therese, they denied my exemption. I'm going to lose my pension. I'm going to lose the health care for the family. Like, we're going to go under unless I get this into my arm. And she's like, I already have the antibodies. And we understood, like, if we had the antibodies, why did we need, and people are about organic food and keeping their bodies natural. And then it was like, okay, now you're going to put something that was warp speed synthetic into your body. And a lot of us were just like, we don't see why we need to have this because we've already had it and recovered.
And that's training and education that you had already been through.
Right.
We knew. Are educated, and you know that natural immunity is better than any virus.
Right.
And so did Dr. Fauci.
Right.
Because we have video of him saying so.
Right.
During other periods of
there was so much
sickness,
deception,
right?
Yeah.
But we're not allowed to view those videos anymore, right? CNN wasn't going to dig that up for us.
Right.
I had to dig it up and show it on my show.
Right. No, I believe it.
Right?
I mean, I think
all the experts are telling you that natural immunity is not real. 10 years ago, said it was real.
Right.
And
it didn't match up with
real.
It didn't match up with what we were taught.
This is definitely
I mean, just people touching their mask and getting their debit card at the grocery store and touching I was like, oh, this is not how you wear PPE.
But once you come to that realization and you see this falling apart around you, I mean, you were on the front line, seeing and saying, wait a minute, what do you mean we can't do what we normally do? What do you mean we can't rely on natural immunity, which is the best thing out there? And we've all been taught it in medical school for the last 60, 70 years.
Right. Yep. So with that, there was a couple of other situations going on, and like I said, I was working on call overnight. The boys had summer camp, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get a billboard, and I'm going to go stand outside of Concord Hospital, and I'm going to say honk if you're against the mandated vaccine by these employers. Dartmouth, I had worked for almost everyone on that corner. And it was 95 degrees out that day. I'll never forget it. And I just felt called to go stand. And there was someone else who was going through nursing school who was pregnant, who was in her final semester. She was going to have to drop out unless she got the vaccine. And that was like, that's it. I got to stand for this young mom who's trying to be a nurse. And I stood, and I remember the first car, it was 98 degrees out or whatever it was that day, and a car went by and said, Therese, my red hair, I don't get away with much, you're a nurse, you should be ashamed of yourself. And I thought, me standing here, I may never work again, but I'm going to stand. And I closed my eyes, and next thing I heard was a honk, and then I opened my eyes, and people were walking across the crosswalk. They pulled over their car to come stand with me. So that was the very beginning of me kind of taking a stand. And then at one point I went down to Water Street, where the Republican GOP is. I talked to Maya, like, how do I get involved? We've got a Republican governor I'd voted for, and House and Senate majorities, and how is this happening that people are losing their livelihoods, their businesses, their ability to go to the beach? What do I do? As a triage nurse, I need to shift where the need is. And I became aware of Rebuild New Hampshire, who then had a call to action to go to an executive council meeting. And it was about federal money that they were going to be decisioning. For those that don't know, the Executive Council is the entity in our state that approves anything over $10,000 that we choose to spend. Has to go through the Executive Council.
And that's a low threshold for spending.
Yeah. It's the most power. The 5 Executive Council members actually hold more power than our governor. Mm-hmm. And it's unique to New Hampshire.
Yep. There's no other state that has this type of government.
Our forefathers were genius. Mm-hmm. I truly believe the Executive Council, if you hear nothing more tonight, I want you guys to walk away with understanding the Executive Council is the most important position in my mind's eye in the state of New Hampshire. And that's why my return on investment, my time, my energy is why I'm going for this seat. But everything over $10,000, they were going to be voting on $29 million to use for a registry of who was and who was not vaccinated. And in the grant money, I read the contract. In the grant money, it said, if you accept these funds, you will be obligated to isolate and quarantine anyone the federal government, Biden and Harris at the time, deem a health hazard. Mm-hmm. At the same time, over in Australia, anyone who tested positive was being placed into modular homes.
Right.
And I read that.
Concentration camps.
And I said, no.
There's no, you call it a modular home, mm-hmm. and they can call it whatever they want, but that's rounding up and concentration camping people. And we talked about this, and we've talked about this on the show a lot, about taking federal money that has a hook in it.
Right.
Every bit of federal money that comes into any state has a hook in it. If you take this money, you have to abide by these rules. And I always say, you know what? If we can do without it, turn it down. But you've got legislators and governors, unfortunately, even governors that I've voted for, who are addicted to this money.
Yes. Yes.
Federal
money is free money.
And they don't care about those hooks. And that was a hook that really angered me.
Amen. So I rallied everyone I knew. We called, we emailed, we texted. Long story short, I end up at the executive council meeting where they're going to make the vote. And an hour into the meeting, I was tapped on the shoulder and asked to come to the back of the room. I was put into zip ties, and I was told I was being arrested for disorderly conduct. And I said, what did I do? My boys were there with me. They had just gone outside with my soon-to-be mother-in-law. I had to work that night, and they couldn't answer what I had done wrong. And off I go to get fingerprinted. I had to have my future father-in-law come bail me out. It was completely surreal. I thought, am I going to lose custody of my children? Am I going to lose my nursing license, my ability to work? Like, what have I just done to stand up and say, this isn't okay?
The system has been weaponized against you.
It was.
And like I said, unfortunately, we didn't handle that in this state as well as other states did.
Yeah.
As well as other red states did. Of course, we're not entirely a red state. So.
Right. So then that, whole 8 hearings, they dropped the charges the night before my trial. I was not warned. There was a general warning to the crowd, but the video showed that I had taken the boys to the bathroom during that time. So I wasn't even there for the general warning that we're supposed to be quiet. There's video of me going like this to the crowd to remind them to stay quiet. But long story short, they dropped the charges. That catapulted me into the front line of a grassroots conservative movement here in New Hampshire. It's now 9,000 members strong, We the People in New Hampshire. Social media website, we meet weekly via Zoom, strategically, just trying to look at who are our candidates that are running. Can we trust that they really are for us and not for the lobbyist and corruption and tyranny? And working together to do our diligence and then share that diligence out to the mom who barely has time to put the dishes away, who wants to do and go and vote for the right people. But it's basically just the grassroots coming together saying, okay, we need to really stop and work together as a team to figure out, and then if there's not a quality candidate, let's raise up individuals that we want representing us. And we can trust that when they go, they're going to make sure the money coming out of my paycheck truly gets to the people that need it. So, of course, naturally through this, being who I am, I had to study who this executive council is, and I started going to the meetings. I've been to the meetings now for 3 years, every 2 weeks, and I go live and I share out with the general community that's in my sphere of influence, the 9,000, what's on the agenda. What I've found is the room is completely filled with lobbyists every 2 weeks when I go. There's only 3 or 4 of us constituents there in the room. Most of the contracts are going to out-of-state contractors. And a few months back, one of the executive council members questioned why a bid was awarded to one entity versus the other. And I kid you not, the quote was, well, the bidding process is not fraud, but it is flawed. And I thought to myself, we need to unflaw it. We need to go and open up and see what's the hurdle to keeping our in-state business bidding on our state contract work. Because that would create jobs, that would put more food on the table for our own families. And when I look at what's being awarded and where the money is going, and these out-of-state contractors, and if you take a couple and you follow it all the way through, you can see the backdoor deals. You can see that the money that has been budgeted for the state to spend, for example, there was a line item where it was to go to Waypoint for children who age out of the system to avoid them going into homelessness or into jail, and funds there to kind of help support them in vocational training and housing. So I called, they approved it. I called Waypoint to say, hey, I came across this kid and this is the situation. He's aged out of foster care. Do you have any services for him? And the answer was, we don't have anything to help with that. So of course, then I go back to the executive council and I say, you remember that line item you voted for? And it was supposed to go to Waypoint, a third-party contractor, where there's no oversight. Well, I called, and guess what? They don't say they have any services for this child. What happened to the money? And the more I sat and the more I go and the more I attend, the more I realized there was a reason my journey had me arrested at an executive council meeting, of all things, to take that back history of my career, my passion for humans. Of course, I want my money that's going down to Washington to come back to New Hampshire. I work hard for my money. But we need to make certain, and what I hear is, federal money is free money. No, it's not. It came out of my paycheck. I'm sure the single mom doesn't want us to spend $9 million on photography because we don't know where to spend it, and if we don't spend it, we're going to lose it. Or the other excuse I hear is, well, if we don't take it, it will go to the Ukraine. Well, I don't like that either, but we can't enable dysfunction.
So
there's just so much that needs to be done here.
No, absolutely. So this, let's talk about Waypoint, because I'm curious. We gave some money to Waypoint. Now, Waypoint is a program, they
do a lot of good work.
They have a facility here in Manchester. But this money was for Waypoint to deal with folks who aged out of foster care.
Yes.
Waypoint got the money.
Yes.
What did they do with it?
Well, and that was the question. I called and just kind of did like a, let's go bottom up and call and say, hey, I've run into this kid and he was in foster care, he aged out of the system, and he's looking for services for housing. He can't afford, obviously housing's ridiculous. Is there anything to help get him in the front of the line for Section 8 housing? And I've done a lot of case management as a nurse. What can we call 211? What services, healthcare, vocational training. And they said, let us look into it and get back to you. I waited, no one got back to me. I follow up, do another phone call, finally got someone. And I had it, this is about a year or two ago, and I had it all logged, all my phone conversations, who I spoke to. And I brought it back to the executive council to say, hey, you gave money to DHHS to fill this contract to Waypoint for this purpose, but at the end of the day, it's not getting to the people that need it. Where'd it go?
So were you able to follow up? You said that when you followed the money, you found who was behind it, the lobbyists and whatnot. Were you able to follow up on that piece, or?
There's been several situations very similar to that, where you follow it and, you just kind of get the runaround, or you get the executive council members looking at you like deer in the headlights, like they don't really know where to go. We've had a change in DHHS commissioners, and everyone says, yeah, the third-party contracts are a hot mess, and, the oversight, and you've got the DCYF issue, right? There's enough liability there to bankrupt the state. And I was very much aware of what was going on at YDC. I was actually working with someone, Mary Frances Rainier, out of Canopy Lake area, who's helped a lot of kids who have aged out of the system. And we had heard stories of children who had survived and made it out of the Sununu Center. And we were like, we have to do something. So we proposed a mentoring program. We were going to get into the kids, right, and make sure they were safe. So we proposed a mentoring program, and we actually got it approved by Joe Ripsom, and we were able to take a tour, and we were going to bring animal therapy and music therapy and people in to do crafts with the kids and just kind of be there to lay eyes on them. And I ended up getting MP3 players for all the kids, and then the news broke about all the sexual abuse, and they shut down and they shut us out from doing the mentoring program and going in. And so I've kind of watched that whole thing unfold as well. And, as I look at the reports from the civil disabilities, it was during the time, 2007, 2009. One of my opponents was the DHHS commissioner during that time. And you've got Kelly Ayotte, who was AG, and we have all this evidence that all of these reports made it to them. And probably for liability on the taxpayer, they kind of were like, didn't know what to do with this. But now that the closet doors are wide open, we see it happened and continue to happen for another 10 years. The liability is huge. And honestly, the 10 men have been arrested. There's a lot more that knew what was going on and have not been arrested. But the 10 that were arrested are still walking around. They still haven't had a trial. They're still getting their pensions. Some of them are getting so old that they're no longer competent to stand trial. So the victims are like, you want me to sign a piece of paper to take $100 million because I was abused? And the stories, if you knew the stories, they're outrageous. But the man who did it is still has access to children. And when I'm very involved with the victims group, and they said, what we really want, Therese, is we really want it to stop. We want to know that every child going to sleep tonight in New Hampshire, that there's been some sort of mechanism put into place to make certain that they're not being raped and sodomized. And they're having a hard time just taking the money because they know the issue, that we still haven't rectified that. And now we're potentially having individuals running for office that were in leadership at the time of the abuse. And when I ask, have you looked at the reports? Have you looked to see that it happened on your watch? The response I get in front of witnesses is, no, I haven't looked at that. If I ran a business and a company and something horrible happened with that company, you better bet your bottom dollar I'm going to go back to see if it happened on my watch.
That's insane.
We've got to fix that.
Yeah, we got to fix that. But is the executive council the place to fix it?
So the other part of the executive council is that we are responsible for voting all the appointed positions into place. Okay. So the governor will nominate the AG, will nominate judges. So if you've ever been in family court and you felt like things were bananas, that comes all the way back to the executive council. So, the governor, whoever's in that corner office will, this is our Supreme Court. So if you're concerned about who's going to make it into that corner office, you want to make sure you have really strong executive council members because they're going to nominate someone for a judge to interpret our constitutional rights. Executive council is there to vet them, due diligence, interview them, listen to the community and what their experience is about this individual, and then they vote to actually appoint that person into place. So if you want integrity with your AG, you want integrity in your courts, all your commissioners, I think there's over 200 appointed positions here in the state of New Hampshire that aren't elected individuals, and it all comes back again to that core group of executive council members. So if we want DCYF to be right and tight, if we want DHHS to be right and tight, if we want our court system to be right and tight, you got to make sure you have people, these 5 seats are what discern and determine that. It's a really important role. I'm not a politician. I have a beautiful life. I have a mare that's about to give birth. I have my 2 beautiful boys. We have a business. I really am doing this, and I've told people I will be donating. It's $17,000 salary to be an executive council. That will be donated to. There's currently 51 children right now in New Hampshire that are legally free for adoption through DCYF. That number has never been that high, and a lot of those children I know, and I would love to rescue them all. If I could win $1 million, that's what I would do. But I can promote that they're there because they're out of sight, out of mind. Mm-hmm. We all want to rush in to rescue the dog that comes up on Facebook, right? But there's children, beautiful, beautiful children. And so I will be donating should I be elected, would be donated to help, again, go back to the Forgotten Initiative, the ministry I was doing, and making sure that is going to help promote, hey, we as a community and as a culture need to take care of these orphans. And the interesting thing about the Sununu Center, I'm such a researcher, the title of that land, when I first went there, I was like, how is this prime real estate in Manchester with these beautiful mansions?
Huge.
Why would we have a juvenile jail on this property? Because this property is prime
it's been there for
real estate.
What, 20 years, 30 years?
So I have the answer. It was donated to the state of New Hampshire by General Stark to benefit the orphans of the mill buildings. That's how
not really where it is right now. Well, I mean, it's benefiting children, but not exactly in a positive manner as of late.
Right. But if you look at it, that was General Stark's farm. That was his land. And he gifted it to the state of New Hampshire to do something beautiful and to do something good. And if you think about it, they're like, we just want to bulldoze it, we're going to build somewhere else. Well, it wasn't the building that did the harm. Like, you have the barns there for our mounted police, and I don't know if you guys have seen this property, but we have a homeless situation. We have people, families. I think about Harmony Montgomery, and if her family just had diapers and had rest and had some, they must have been tired, and I'm not justifying anything that father did, but had we had some place without questions asked, and there's models like this. Chick-fil-A's, the founder of Chick-fil-A, his daughter has a model that's beautiful. And it took a property like that property we have here in Manchester and did a wraparound, and no questions asked. All of a sudden you find yourself in a situation, you can go and bring your child, have full visitation to that child, and do a temporary guardianship. And whenever you're ready, have that temporary guardianship removed. But that child is fed, cared for, safe, medical care, attention, schooling, until that parent feels as though they're ready to come back and take that back full time. So the mom who needs to get out from an abusive situation, the person who loses their job, the person who gets evicted, the divorce situation, the addict, whatever it is, every crime we see on TV, there's usually at least 2 children involved in what we're seeing, whether it be a drug overdose. And so if we had a place where the kids didn't necessarily need to go into DCYF care, but they could go somewhere that kind of could take care of them, and then maybe have those social services available for those parents who have just been, how many people in our society are one car crash away from their whole world financially crumbling down on them?
So that's,
I don't know.
You say there are programs like that elsewhere in the States?
Yes.
Because that seems a little extreme.
Not in New Hampshire, but Mary Frances Rainier actually.
In the States.
In the United States. Yep.
But it seems a little extreme, like, we've all heard about there are a few states where you can drop your newborn up to a few months at the fire station, right? That's the cliche, right? And that feels like what you're kind of talking about, but of any age, and I see the benefit of it to a family in need, but I also see a program like that being abused a little bit. Like
a free babysitter.
Yeah.
Here, take my kids.
And, take my kids. I need a mental break for a month.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
No. And
and then my tax dollars going to it. If we're gonna have another government agency, I want to.
This isn't through the gut. Yeah. This is private.
I'm all about private.
Yeah, this is private, and you really have to look at the model.
But here's the thing: if you've got private, you're also talking about guardianship, right? And that involves the government. So you've got to get some regulation in there. There's always going to be a hook, right? Right.
And if you really look at, it was like a 1-week seminar in Georgia that I went to, and you have to really look at the model, and it's been in existence, and it's a well-oiled machine, but it is all through private, and it's highly successful, and they don't have a single child in that county where that exists that isn't placed once they're free for adoption. So they have volunteers that come in and work. It's just a really beautiful model. You have to see it.
It's got to be a private, because it's the only type of organization that actually makes inroads.
Yeah.
All right. So
all kinds of ideas. We could go on forever.
So let's talk about the executive council, and let's talk about your race. Talk about. Let's first off. You've got this experience that is perfect for the executive council.
It really is.
You've got this experience overseeing, billion-dollar portfolios at major financial centers.
Yes.
All right. So money is your thing. You are trained and experienced with the receipts to come with it to look through line item by line item and trace money to where it belongs and where it came from. So you've got that. You've got the humanitarian business going down, and you've been. You mentioned you've been to executive council meeting. Every executive, well, most,
not everyone,
but for 3 years. So tell us what's
very
going
consistently.
on. So you're very visible at executive council meetings.
Yes, they see me coming. They see me when I pull out my phone to go live on Facebook. So yes, I live 6 miles from the State House. So it's very easy for me to scoot down there on the Wednesdays. I'm the only candidate that has been going on a consistent basis for the last 3 years. And And I'm able to kind of just, take a look at this does not look right, and then kind of start to really critically think what's going on there.
During those meetings, you're obviously a familiar face. At an executive council meeting, are you able to testify on things? So there's no input outside.
No.
It's just a viewing audience for folks to come in, check it out, and be present during the discussion.
Yeah, if anyone watching ever wants to go with me to one, we go to lunch afterwards in the cafeteria. The soup is fantastic, by the way. And it's your house. The State House is your house. That is where it is for the people's business. And the agenda's there, it's printed out. You can get it ahead of time online and see what they're going to be decisioning, who the nominations are. You can see the dialogue that the executive council members have with each other before they vote. Oftentimes it's, all in favor of line item 1 through 54 say aye, and they do a whole batch, without any discussion, which is kind of crazy. The stack of paperwork is about this deep every 2 weeks. So it's a full-time job to truly go through the contracts. Now the reality is they break it out by department. So each department has a commissioner. So Parks and Recreation, so the Department of Transportation, that kind of thing. So you'll get to know the different commissioners, and of course they're going to get to know me that, hey, if something doesn't look right, guess what? She's going to call us up, and they do have to come up and speak to the executive council and answer their questions. So they want to have.
So the only people that get to put input are the people who are looking to have their money approved.
Yes, so the agenda is by department. So when we get to the Department of Education, for example, Fred Edelblue will come up and there's a microphone, and the executive council members will go through everything on the agenda that has to do with the Department of Education and ask him questions and kind of interrogate him and then decision the vote. So Frank has to come up and then speak to why he's asking for money for this, and that.
So how about the lobbyists? You say you see a lot of lobbyists there. What role do they play at these meetings every couple of weeks? How does that work? Are they taking everybody out to lunch, or what's going on?
So the big part of it, the first part of the agenda is DHHS after they get through like nominations and resignations and things. But DHHS is the bulk of our spending, and the room is full, like standing room only. And once we get through DHHS's part, there's like 10 chairs taken, like all of a sudden like the whole room empties. But most of that is third-party contractors. Your Accenture, your Waypoints, I mean, it's just...
They're there to see if they're going to get their money.
We outsource.
But they don't have input.
No.
But they're shaking hands before and after the meetings.
Yes. So you see them drive away in their sports car, and then I go to Walmart to get juice boxes for my boys, and I see an 80-year-old pushing a cart. And I'm like, this is just not okay. Something is not right. There's more than enough money to take. We actually had more money, $125 million more than we needed. And at the end of the last few meetings, they were like, we don't know where to spend this. And I'm like, I put a Twitter post, like, how many of you is your budget working this way? Because that's not how our budget works in our house. There's always a car repair or something that truly needs to happen. But yeah, it's maddening because there's more than enough money, in my opinion, to take care of everyone much better than we are. And I just feel like there's a lot of hands in the cookie jar. And, I'm there the job description, if you look up the job description, it actually states it's to be the watchdog for the people in Concord. And I have been the watchdog for the people in Concord since I was arrested. And there's no other candidate that's willing to be zip-tied, put in a paddy wagon, lose her nursing license, custody of her children, her reputation, all of it, to say that right there, that's not okay. Where you're not going to isolate and quarantine people.
So you've been attending these meetings. You got there because you were fed up with some things that were going on over the pandemic. But now you've run in the past, so tell me about. Yeah,
so in 22, it's flown under the radar. Nobody knew what the executive council was. So
a lot of people still don't understand what it is.
So they basically they've been rubber stampers. They haven't been what our forefathers intended the role to be. So I couldn't believe nobody was going to primary them. So I went down the last day of filing. I called up my husband and said, babe, can you meet me at the State House? I'm going to go do a thing. He's like, what are you doing now? I said, I'm going to go run. I'm going to declare. And I'm just going to put my name out there. And I got almost 30% of the vote. And I think it was because people were just sick of it. They're sick of career politicians. And it shocked all of us that I would get.
Was that against
Gatz's?
It was against Gatz's.
Yeah.
Was he the only one other
Yes.
one in it? So you took 30% away from Ted.
Yes. So everyone says if I
And that
hold.
was in 2022.
Yes.
And he's not running now.
No, he's retiring. Yes.
Yeah. So now you're up against a pool that kind
Yes.
of filled this void when Ted left.
Yes. And, you know, a lot of people see it as a political stepping stone to become governor. And I had Dave Loveland say, you realize that would be one seat away from the governor. And do you have aspirations? I said, I have no aspirations to be governor. This is the seat I want. And this is the reason why I want this seat, because this is my background, this is my history, this is my passion, the kids. I want to make sure our tax money is getting to the people. This is me. This is what I want. And so I'm not here, I don't have my identity wrapped up into how I'm viewed by, you know, the cliques in our party or any of that. I'm really just here to make sure our tax dollars are working for us. But yeah, I ran, it shocked everyone, and everyone's like, you really need to run for real for 24. And so right away, I decided I was running in 24 and I was gonna run a real campaign. And so this has been planned out for 2 years. Actually met monthly with Lou Gargiulo out on the Seacoast with several others, Michael Bean. People who've been deeply rooted in New Hampshire politics for a very long time have been guiding and consulting. And, you know, I'm first one to be humbled to say, hey, you know, this has not been my wheelhouse. You know, what is it that I'm looking at, and going to the matter experts, Anne Marie Banfield, all these individuals are just fantastic here in New Hampshire. And we put together, my signs are very unique for my campaign.
You have the anime or
Right.
superhero signs.
And there's a whole story behind that.
Well,
I don't know if we'll have
hear it.
time.
No,
so,
we can hear it.
So originally it was going to be 3 of us that were going to go in and run and flip the executive council for 3 like-minded individuals. And unfortunately, one of the candidates, the spouse really wasn't quite on board. And if I didn't have my husband's support, like,
We've heard
you've got to
it
have your family in this.
over and over again. You have to have the support of the family.
Right. And then the other individual ended up with a medical diagnosis that was quite scary right as she was about to declare that she was going to run. So originally we were going to have 3 of us. We were going to do a little comic strip that we were going to hand out to everyone here in Manchester to help educate people on who the executive council was. And we were going to go from a totally different angle, my marketing background coming to play of kind of a Gotham City, and here comes, you know, let's take it away from the lobbyist and the corruption, and let's clean up and bring some integrity and light to, you know, to things and make things better. And really the goal was just to educate people as to what the executive council was. So we have this very talented graphic artist. He's a veteran. From the very beginning, when I stood outside of Concord Hospital, someone did a graphic of a nurse, you know, with her boxing gloves on. And he took that and he redid it, and the grassroots group, the 9,000 We the People New Hampshire, loved it. And to honor them through my journey in these last 3 years, we decided to use that as my campaign branding. And so hard to see when you're driving by at 60 miles an hour. Nobody else has a phone number on their yard sign. I've heard all kinds of different, you know, thoughts about my signage, but you know, it's caused a lot of people to stop and pause and be curious about who I am. Am I a Republican? Because it's not very conservative graphic. It does feel a little misleading because I do not have her waistline.
Technically a non-partisan position, right?
Right.
So,
you know, and no matter who I run into, I go to farmers markets and everything else, and I say, you know, regardless of where you are on the spectrum, I'm sure you want your tax dollars coming out of your paycheck to go to the people who actually need it. And we can all agree on that. There's common ground there. There's a lot of other things that are going to come up. Hot topics. Executive Council is also the one that decisions the money to either fund or not fund Planned Parenthood, and that's the taboo subject nobody wants to go to. I'm very comfortable in that space, and I think that that's going to serve me well if I make the nomination and go on to the general with who the Dems are putting up for a candidate. It's near and dear to me. When I was 22, I found myself working on commission for a mortgage company, actually, and did not renew my prescription when I moved, and went to, and they said I needed a full gynecological exam. That was $300. The prescription was $120, $420. Rent was due that Friday. I had $400 in my bank account. What did I do? I walked away without my oral contraceptive. Same thing. Time went forward. Now at age 51, my 22-year-old daughter goes back to school to become an LNA phlebotomist, doesn't have health insurance, goes to get, and she's working. She didn't qualify because you only qualify if you're 140% of the poverty level. I gave her my health spending account and said, go get your prescription. But my point is, you know, there are over 70 facilities that provide contraceptive, federally funded, but we need to make it accessible and affordable to prevent the pregnancy that woman's not ready and prepared to handle. My two boys, their mom, you know, 80 pounds soaking wet, teeth falling out, addicted, you know, 7 weeks in the NICU, premature 4 months. My little guy, who's now 10, was a multi-million-dollar baby to the taxpayer by the time he went through all his interventions. I am so glad he's here today. But there's circumstances where those pregnancies, those women want them to be prevented, but they're not able to access what they need to prevent the pregnancy. And we should all agree that that is a better choice, no matter where you are on the spectrum. And that would naturally drop the number of abortions down dramatically. So, you know, that's kind of where I fall on that. Title 10 is already decisioned. Taxpayer money is not to go to fund abortions. Planned Parenthood now is looking for a bailout. They spend $5 million, I believe, in the state for lobbying or lobbyists in an article I read. Where there's, like I said,
money, that's just on lobbying. That's,
right.
It's not like it's going towards
to
any
the women,
good cause.
Right. Yeah. So they have the name recognition, but I'm all about women being supported and having the healthiest choice. As a nurse, you know, emotionally and physically, in 2024, that should really be a very rare situation that a woman would have to be faced with that particular choice. And so, you know, we need to land where the majority of the voters fall on this. My own personal convictions, you know, are not how you legislate and decision things. It's got to be where the people, the social contracts we come up with. But I do believe we need to focus on providing the better choices for women, because I think that's just going to be a much healthier thing mentally, physically, emotionally, and a better return on our investment as a society.
All right, we're at the end. Therese, let our audience know how they can get a hold of you and how they can get information.
Sure, it's Therese, Terese, the number 4, nh.com is the website. My phone number is 603-717-1477, and yes, I give it out to everyone. I do my best to pick up, and I make myself available on a weekly basis. And as executive counsel, I would do an open forum at least once a month for constituents. I want to hear your horror stories in family court. I want to know what's going on in order to represent you. And most importantly, the vote is on September 10th. A lot of people aren't tracking to primaries. I think a very small fraction, 1 in 10 people participate in the primaries. That's where you're going to put the best person forward for November. So September 10th, get out and vote and bring 10 people with you. And I would appreciate your vote. I would appreciate your support. And I would love to hearing from you if you have questions, concerns. You know, I can't promise to fix the world, but I will definitely do my best to be the watchdog for you.
All right. Thank you, Therese. Thanks for coming to see us. And that is it for today. We will see you next week, and we'll see JP with us too.